Welcome to Classic Storytime Hub. Tonight, we descend into one of H.P. Lovecraft's most unsettling tales, In the Vault. But what you'll hear is not a simple retelling. It's a reimagined narration, carefully reshaped to heighten suspense and deliver a fresh experience. A story of coffins, confinement, and a vengeance that reaches beyond the grave.
The vault was silent, its air heavy with the scent of dust and decay. Birch's breath echoed against the stone walls as he realized the door had locked behind him. Surrounded by coffins stacked like forgotten relics, he felt the weight of the dead pressing in. Desperation clawed at him. There was only one way out, a narrow window high above. He dragged the coffins into a crude ladder, each creak of wood sounding like a protest from the graves themselves. As he climbed, his foot crashed through a rotten lid. Pain shot through his ankle, but worse was the sensation. Something cold and deliberate had seized him. He tore himself free, trembling, and scrambled toward the light. When he finally escaped, the marks on his flesh told a story no living man could explain. The dead had not forgiven him. This tale owes its spark to a suggestion by C.W. Smith, though what followed grew darker than either of us might have guessed. People often imagine that rural life is simple, wholesome, even comic in its misfortunes. Picture a clumsy village undertaker, a rustic cemetery, and a foolish accident in a tomb. Most readers would expect nothing more than grotesque humor. But the story of George Birch's fate is no comedy. It is a shadowed account, grim enough to make true tragedies seem almost gentle. In 1881, Birch abandoned his trade and carried with him a permanent affliction. He rarely spoke of the incident, and his physician, Dr. Davis, took what he knew to the grave. The common version was simple. Birch had trapped himself for 9 long hours inside the receiving vault of Peck Valley Cemetery and escaped only by crude, desperate means. That much was true. Yet in his final years, half mad with drink, Birch whispered to me darker fragments, things he dared not tell while Davis lived. Before that year, Birch had been the town's undertaker, a man coarse even by the standards of his profession. His methods were careless, his ethics questionable. He was known to strip fine garments from the dead, if they would never be seen again, and to force bodies into ill-fitting coffins with a brutal lack of dignity. Still, I would not call him wicked. He was simply crude, unimaginative, and dulled by drink, a man whose own negligence would one day deliver him into horror.
It is hard to know where Birch's story truly begins, perhaps in the frozen December of 1880, when winter sealed the earth so tightly that no graves could be dug until spring. The village was small, the deaths few, and so the bodies were stored together in one ancient vault, carved into the hillside. The cold seemed to dull Birch's already careless nature. His coffins grew weaker, more crooked, slapped together with indifference. Even the iron lock on the tomb door suffered his neglect, slammed open and shut without thought. When the thaw finally came, 9 coffins waited for burial. Birch dreaded the task, dragging himself to the cemetery one gray April morning. He managed only a single interment, old Darius Peck, laid to rest near the vault before rain drove him away. He promised himself he would return the next day for Matthew Fenner, but laziness stretched the delay into 3. By Good Friday, April 15th, he finally set out again. Birch was not sober. He admitted later that drink had left him dizzy, careless, enough to irritate his nervous horse. The animal pawed and snorted as they reached the vault, the wind rising around them. Birch welcomed the shelter, pushing open the iron door and stepping inside. The chamber was damp, foul with the odor of decay. 8 coffins lay scattered in disorder, but Birch hardly noticed. He cared only for the task at hand, choosing the right coffin for the right grave. He remembered too well the scandal when Hannah Bixby's family discovered Judge Capwell's casket beneath her stone. Tonight, he thought, there would be no such mistake. Yet fate had already chosen otherwise.
The vault was dim, shadows pressing in from every corner. Birch's eyes, sharp even in the gloom, found the coffin he sought, Matthew Fenner's. Years earlier, in a rare moment of sentiment, he had built Fenner a sturdy casket, recalling the old man's kindness during his bankruptcy. The rejected, flimsy box he had crafted instead was saved for another. Asaph Sawyer, a man remembered only for his cruelty and spite. Birch felt no guilt in giving Sawyer the weaker coffin, and now he shoved it aside without thought. Just then, the wind roared through the cemetery, and the iron door slammed shut. Darkness thickened, leaving Birch fumbling among the coffins. The narrow window admitted only a faint trickle of light, and the air grew heavy, stale. He rattled the handles, shoved at the panels, cursed under his breath, but the latch had failed. The vault had become his prison. It was mid-afternoon, perhaps 3:30, when Birch realized the truth. His horse outside answered his shouts with nothing more than a hollow neigh. Resigned, he searched the chamber by touch, recalling a pile of tools left in the corner. Hammer and chisel in hand, he returned to the door, striking blindly at the corroded metal. The air was foul, thick with decay, but Birch ignored it. He needed light, a lantern, anything, but had none. So he worked in near blindness, each clang of iron echoing through the tomb, each breath reminding him of the dead that surrounded him.
Birch soon realized the latch would never yield, not to his feeble tools, nor in the suffocating darkness of the vault. His eyes searched desperately for another way out. The narrow vent above was useless, buried beneath layers of earth. But over the door, a thin transom slit offered a faint promise of escape, if only he could reach it. There was no ladder, no shelves to climb, only the coffins themselves stood as possible steps. He measured the height in his mind. 3 coffins might be enough, 4 would be better. The boxes were roughly even, and he imagined stacking them into a crude staircase. Yet even as he planned, he cursed their flimsy construction, wishing they were sturdier, or perhaps even empty. At last he devised his scheme: 3 coffins as a base, 2 more stacked above, then another pair, and finally a single box at the top to serve as his platform. If needed, 1 coffin could be held in reserve to add height. And so, in the dim twilight, Birch began his grim labor. He dragged and heaved the lifeless cargo without ceremony, building his own grotesque tower from the dead. The wood groaned and split under the strain, but Birch pressed on. For the summit, he saved the strongest casket, Matthew Fenner's, so his feet might find solid ground. In the half-light, he relied on touch more than sight, and when his hands closed upon Fenner's coffin, it seemed almost to fall into his grasp of its own accord, as though guided by some unseen will.
At last the tower was complete. Birch, his arms trembling from the strain, paused on the lowest step of his macabre construction, before climbing cautiously upward with hammer and chisel in hand. The narrow transom above seemed his only hope, its brick frame promising freedom if he could chip away enough space to squeeze through. Each strike of the hammer rang through the vault, answered by the horse outside, with a whinny that sounded half like encouragement, half like mockery. The bricks, stubborn and unyielding, mocked him too, reminding him how fragile mortal hopes can be. Night deepened. Clouds smothered the moon, leaving Birch to work by touch alone. He cursed when fragments struck his face, laughed bitterly when others flew outward to pelt the restless horse pawing beneath the cypress. Slowly the hole widened. He tested it with his body, shifting uneasily as the coffins beneath him creaked and rocked. The height was just right. Soon, he thought, he would be free. By midnight, drenched in sweat, Birch descended to rest. The horse's neighing had grown uncanny, almost human in its urgency, and he wished it would stop. Strangely, he felt no triumph at the thought of escape, only dread at the effort it would take. His stout frame weighed heavily as he climbed again, each step pressing harder on the splitting coffins. Then came the sound, the sharp crack of wood giving way. The coffin he had trusted most betrayed him, its lid collapsing beneath his bulk. He dropped 2 feet, landing on a surface he dared not imagine. A stench rose, foul and overwhelming, spilling into the night. Outside, the horse screamed, not a neigh, but a shriek of terror, and bolted wildly into the darkness, dragging the wagon behind in a frenzy of rattling wheels.
Birch, trapped in his nightmare, found himself too low to reach the transom easily. Summoning what strength remained, he clutched the edges and tried to haul himself upward. That was when he felt it, a strange resistance, a drag at his ankles. At first, he thought it was splintered wood or loose nails, but the pressure grew into a grip, relentless and alive. Pain tore through his calves, sharp and savage, and for the first time that night, fear consumed him. He thrashed, kicked, and screamed, whether aloud or only in his mind, he could not tell. Half-conscious, he fought against the unseen hold until instinct alone carried him through the narrow opening. He fell hard onto the damp earth outside, gasping, his body broken and bleeding. The moonlight revealed a ghastly sight. Birch, dragging himself across the cemetery grounds, clawing at the soil with frantic hands, his torn ankles leaving a trail behind him. He moved with the maddening slowness of a nightmare chase, desperate to reach the lodge. At last, Armington, the keeper, heard the feeble scratching at his door. He pulled Birch inside, laid him on a spare bed, and sent his son racing for Dr. Davis. Birch was conscious, but his words were incoherent, muttering only of his ankles, of something that would not let go, of being shut in the tomb. When the doctor arrived, his questions were sharp, his hands trembling as he stripped away Birch's clothing and examined the wounds. Both ankles were savagely torn, the tendons mangled in ways no accident could explain. The physician's face paled as he bound them quickly, almost as if he wished to hide the horror from sight. Something about those wounds unsettled him deeply, as though they whispered of a truth too dreadful to name. Dr. Davis was no ordinary physician, yet his interrogation of Birch that night carried a strange intensity. He pressed the undertaker for every detail, his voice trembling as he asked again and again, was Birch certain of the coffin he had chosen? Was it truly Fenner's sturdy box, or had he mistaken it in the gloom for Sawyer's? The coffin built carelessly, for a man remembered only for his malice. Could Fenner's casket have splintered so easily? The questions seemed less medical than fearful, as though Davis already suspected an answer too dreadful to speak. After 2 hours, the doctor left Birch with stern instructions. Tell anyone who asked that the wounds came from nails and splintered wood. Nothing more. No other explanation would ever be believed. Birch obeyed this counsel for the rest of his life. I saw the scars myself, white and ancient, carved deep into his ankles, and I understood why silence had been his refuge. He walked with a limp ever after, but the greater wound was in his mind. Words like Friday, tomb, or coffin could reduce him to trembling. His horse had fled that night, but Birch's sanity never fully returned. He abandoned his trade, but something gnawed at him always. Fear, perhaps, or a late-born remorse for his careless dealings with the dead. Drink only worsened what it was meant to dull. That same night, Davis carried a lantern back to the vault. The moon lit the broken bricks and scarred facade, and the door opened easily from the outside. Inside, the stench was overwhelming. The sight unbearable. The doctor, hardened though he was by years in dissecting rooms, cried out once, and then gasped in a way more terrible than any scream. He fled back to the lodge, breaking every rule of his profession, shaking Birch awake and whispering into his ears a torrent of words so dreadful they burned like acid. What he saw in that tomb he never told, but it was enough to scar them both forever.
It was Sawyer's coffin, Birch, there's no doubt. I recognized him at once, even in decay, by the gap in his teeth. God help us, never show those wounds. The body was ruined, yes, but the face still carried that same venomous rage. You know what kind of man he was, vindictive to the core. He destroyed Raymond decades after a petty land dispute and crushed a puppy beneath his heel for daring to snap at him. He was cruelty made flesh, and I swear his thirst for revenge could rival death itself. Why did you do it, Birch? I understand giving him the discarded coffin, but you always went too far. Fennett was a small man, you knew that. And now I'll never erase the image from my mind. When you kicked, Sawyer's coffin was on the floor, his skull shattered, everything thrown into chaos. I've seen horrors before, but this was different. An eye for an eye, Birch. You got what you deserved. The broken skull was hideous enough, but worse, far worse, were your ankles. Severed clean, as if the coffin itself had demanded they fit Fenner's rejected box. That sight will haunt me until the day I die.
And thus the story ended. If you liked this journey into the worlds of classic literature, do not forget to support us by subscribing so we can tell you more. And hey, if there's a classic tale you'd love to hear told in this suspenseful style, drop its name in the comments below. Your suggestion might be our next chilling adventure.